Okay.
I'm gonna have Goofy back here read. uh, maybe 27.
Did you say Malachi?
I did say Malachi. I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Matthew 27,
Actually, yeah, verse 27.
27,
27, 27.
37. Okay.
And I'm just gonna have him read part of it. I have some extra notes as well, and then I accidentally kind of themed my notes. All of my like, this is awful. I hate knowing this about crucifixion notes are in the Gospel of Mark. So I'm going to flip over to Mark to get those notes. But it's the synoptics are synopticking through this.
Matthew 27 through.
So 27 through the end of 27.
Okay.
And I'll just have you stop every little bit instead of you reading straight through, I think. Just,
You're going to read each pericope, is that the word?
yeah.
Hey.
Okay. So a pericope is like a paragraph, the little chunks of text. That's what's called a pericope. I'm going to have him through our translation, which is the ESV, but this specific one, have him stop at every time that it stops
Okay.
so that I can give you notes in an order that makes sense, and also so that he's not just and then we all fall asleep because he's talking and boring as it is.
Chapter 27, verse 27.
Yeah.
Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him. And they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head and put a reed in his right hand. And kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they spit on him, and took the reed and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him and led him away to crucify him.
All right. Make sure I'm not missing something. No. Okay. So I'm gonna scooch back just a smidge. The scourging is the word that my translation uses, but 26 it says that he released Barabbas and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. The cruelty here we'll get into from my mark notes because like I said, all of my awful notes are over there for some reason. But there's a reference to Isaiah 52:14 through all of the scourging and the spitting and the striking and the mocking and the everything, which I did not know. So I wanted to give you
You
real
say
quick. I don't
Isaiah 50, what's it again?
52:14.
Okay.
The word, like the Greek word for the headquarters, the governor's headquarters, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it is a common meeting courtyard outside of maybe Herod's residence, maybe Pilate's palace. Could be just a courtyard outside of a legal like a Roman building, but probably Herod's home, just for the timeline to make sense. Um, and it had to have been a large area. Somewhere between 200 and 600 soldiers were here for this mocking and beating, all of everything that's going on. Okay. 32 through 44 for him.
As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name. They compelled the man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his garments among them by casting lots. Then they sat down and kept watch over him there. And over his head they put the charge against him, which read, This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Then two robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who passed by derided them, wagging their heads and saying, You who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. So also the chief priests with the scribes and elders mocked him, saying, He saved others. He cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he desires him. For he said, I am the Son of God. And the robbers who were crucified with him also reviled him in the same way.
Okay. So Cyrene, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I don't know. I don't know how to speak English. Is a city in northern Africa populated with many Jews. That's all I got for you. I don't know. It's a place. Oh, but yeah, he was just a random person that they would have compelled to carry. And technically, what was being carried was the cross beam. They would have the base in the ground, just on hills across different areas. And so what they were carrying was the arm part, which doesn't make it any better. Apparently, that was alone around like 100 pounds.
Wow.
And someone who was beaten nearly to death, having to. Anyway, the wine mixed with gall, some translations literally say myrrh, some other gospels literally say myrrh. It is something that the women of Jerusalem would often do because they felt bad watching the crucifixions. It was usually so Roman citizens could not be crucified. And crucifixions were usually for insurrectionists. And so naturally, it was often Jewish people being crucified, at least in this area, because it's where the Jews are. And so the women of Jerusalem figured out, as women do, these little tinctures that help with like numbing people or like pain relief or things, and they would let them. So on some sort of like a sponge or something, sometimes it was lifted up, like we see with the hyssop he drinks later. And then sometimes while they're nailing them to the cross, the women are like, please drink this. Please drink it. And he takes a sip of it and realizes, which means he not only had complete control of his senses the whole time, he felt everything, every single thing. Whereas usually the people would accept and it dulled their senses and they wouldn't feel as much. And the initial scourging, it seems like Pilate thought might actually be enough for the Jews to relent and let him go, and it still didn't work.
This was more than them
It just
believing that Jesus was wrong. It was
their chant of crucify him is like legally binding. By popular demand, he was crucified. Even if Pilate had been like, no, you can have him, I'm like, and had a backbone, their chant was enough.
so scared of Jesus messing with their status quo that they were foaming at the mouth at this point.
Yeah.
Enough that they had succeeded in killing him, but they continued.
Yeah. I do have a couple of notes from my John text. You don't have to flip over or anything unless you just want to. But verse 16 and then 17 talks about they took Jesus and then he goes out bearing his cross. And this is a reference to two symbols, or what we would say are types, like typology, Old Testament. So his going out is a reference back to the sin offering that is taken outside of the walls of the camp or the city. And then bearing, you scared me to death. Oh my Lord. My heart stopped. Bless you.
And you
Okay. Just bearing his own cross is a reference back to Isaac carrying his wood for his sacrifice in Genesis 22. 45 through 56.
Yeah. Now from the sixth hour there was darkness over all the land until the ninth hour. And about the ninth hour Jesus cried out with a loud with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? And some of the bystanders hearing it said, This man is calling Elijah. One of them at once ran and took a sponge and filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. And the centurion and those who were with him, keeping watch over Jesus, saw the earthquake and what took place. They were filled with awe and said, Truly, this was the Son of God. There were also many women there, looking on from a distance, who had followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering to him, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee.
Okay, so the period of darkness, in this period of darkness is when Jesus became the sin offering for the whole world. We have verse references of John 1:29, Romans 5:8, 2 Corinthians 5:21, and 1 Peter 2:24. The cry out of why have you forsaken me is kind of debated. There are two main camps. One is because Psalm 22 is a prophecy that literally, like the casting of lots and like it's Psalm 22 matches the crucifixion story. And so some people are of the camp that he was saying it and potentially the whole thing. Some people say that he recited the entire thing and they're just putting, because they didn't have like Psalm 22, it was known by the opening line, that it wasn't just that he said this thing, he maybe said the whole thing, but that doesn't make any sense for them to be like, well, no, he's trying to call out for Elijah. So I don't know about that, but it could have been a reference to the psalm. And for like those who know, and they go, oh, like the Sanhedrin that should have known their psalms would have maybe heard that, and that'd be like the final thing that clicked or whatever. But there's another camp, and I kind of take this one, and it's tricky to talk about, but when Jesus becomes the sin offering, the Father and the Holy Spirit have to judicially forsake him in order for him to be the sin offering. But also they were never fully separate. It's hard for us to wrap our heads around, and it's hard, but in order for it to have, he had to have been forsaken. And that means for the first time ever, the Son was separated from the Father in any way, shape, or form. And it may just be, yes, it's a psalm, but he's the literal word of God. So of course he's quoting scripture, that he was actually crying out, like, I literally miss you, other piece of me. Like, you know, if I rip my arm off, I'm gonna cry. You know, it's and I kind of take that one a little bit more than just him. I mean, he could be referencing, there could be a lot going on here. It could be, yes. But I think for how much of humility and agony that we see this whole thing from the time that he starts washing their feet through till he's buried is humiliating and agonizing and awful. And for him to feel forsaken and then cry out
And it would also kind of like correlate with how he was in Gethsemane, of just praying and
Right.
and in a sense begging for this not, I mean,
Yeah.
not to happen, even though
Right.
it
He
was
knew it had
going
to
to,
happen,
but he
but
still,
yeah.
yeah, he still that the
Um,
human side of him was like, I can't, I don't want to do this.
yeah. And then it is apparently someone didn't hear it, or because best we can tell, John was like front row. He's the only disciple that stayed the entire time. So he probably heard the "I thirst" because it was likely not yelled. We call it the cries of Christ, but he probably wasn't screaming every time. Uh, John is the same gospel with the "I am" statements, which means his claim of being the living water or the water of life is the same gospel that he dies of thirst in.
Wow.
People who are crucified, which we'll get to that in a second, but people who are crucified normally are dying of exhaustion and thirst. A lot of people will tell you that they die of like heart attacks and stuff, and they might have. I mean, like that's not outside of the realm of possibility. Oftentimes, they actually wouldn't even make it to the crucifixion because the scourging was so brutal that they wouldn't make it. But that they were dying of exhaustion and thirst, and so for the living water to be dying of thirst. So the curtain of the temple was torn in two. The curtain, you may know, but in case whoever's watching doesn't, the curtain separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which is where God's presence was supposed to be, in the Holy of Holies. And it being torn from top to bottom means that it was God tearing it. It wasn't just man like ripping it open or whatever. But it also is now signifying that everyone has access to the presence of God, which is beautiful.
That gave me chills.
I know.
Curtain also was one massive piece of fabric. There were no seams in it. There was
Yeah.
a stitching that's
Yeah, it wasn't like
pulled
it just
apart.
kind of came undone or something. It was a huge torn into. And the earth shook and rocks were split. And because we're not going to go over the resurrection this evening, I want to point you to 28:2. And behold, there was a great earthquake. The death and resurrection of Jesus involved earthquakes, apparently. As he died and as he came back, the earth shook, which we see this a lot, like in reference to God's power. You'll see it sort of like divine judgment-y language throughout the prophets and stuff, but you see it a lot with theophanies. Or think about like the glory cloud in Exodus. Like things like that are often accompanied by earthquakes and thunderstorms, and so the incarnate presence of God, his death and resurrection, is accompanied by theophany, creation effect. It's just, I don't know. It's really, and I don't. Nobody was like really agreeing with it. I found one commentary that was like, "This is the language." I was like, "Yeah, it is," and then nobody else was talking about it. They just were skipping right over it. But I think that's really cool, and nobody can. No, but I'm sure there's somebody out there that has noticed, but I didn't see anybody, and it made me upset. And so I'm gonna go online and tell you that that is theophany language.
Noticed something back in verse 53, and it says, "And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many."
Yes. This verse is probably out of order. Not that like a scribe was like, "Oh, that's him," but that he just kind of put all of the major events
Yeah.
in one. So yes.
After the earth shook, all these tombs were opened, and then they just, I guess, didn't have time to close them all because days later, when Christ came back, they also were raised.
That is literally what this commentary says. Oh. So I'm going to give you a note that kind of is tied to something he technically hasn't read yet. But it says in 56, we have Mary, and then this other woman who some people believe was also named Mary. I know, shocker.
Yeah. Like with Mary's.
It's a squad of Marys. Someone was,
Mary Man.
but these women, and then we have in verse 61, Mary, and guess what? Mary, the women are with him until the end, not the disciples. At most, John is still there. Everyone else left. Everyone else has abandoned him. Peter goes off and weeps. He is never seen returning. Best we can tell, he's not there. Matthew is not believed to have been there until the end. And then the other disciples had fled when he was arrested. So it is just these mostly moms. The mother of the sons of Zebedee is the moms of some of the disciples. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, that's a mom of some disciples. Mary Magdalene is a disciple. His mom was there. That's another, it's a bunch of mamas.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a bunch of mamas with this precious darling angel boy that they probably watched grow up, or that they've now entrusted their sons with. And so then, as moms do, they've taken in Jesus. Like, we forget about the other humans around, but Jesus and his band of goofballs would have been like invited into these women's home to have meals and things like these, and as women do, like, we get attached. These moms were thinking of him as their own, I'm sure of it. Especially
Like-
darling, precious angel baby literally can do literally no wrong. Of course we love.
Peter's mom that Jesus healed, and the first thing she did was make everybody food.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or mother-in-law, right?
Mhm.
Her Ema, right?
Mhm.
For Matthew's gospel to be mentioning women so frequently right here at the crucifixion, it's a little bit telling. And you're gonna get 1,000 different answers on what he's telling, but I just think it's worth noticing that there's a ton of women right here at the end, and that's it. Maybe John, maybe not. Anyway, 57 through 61. Honestly,
Finish it off.
it's like too little. So yeah.
When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who also was a disciple of Jesus. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a linen shroud, and laid it in his own new tomb, which he had cut out in the rock. And he rolled a great stone to the entrance of the tomb and went away. Mary and Magdalene and the other Mary were there, sitting opposite the tomb. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, After 3 days I will rise. Therefore, order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people, He has risen from the dead, and the last fraud will be worse than the first. Pilate said to them, You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can. So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting the guard.
All right. So this Joseph guy is a member of the Sanhedrin. Arimathea is a town east of Joppa, which you told me was near Tel Aviv.
Yes.
I don't know geography. I don't know.
Yeah.
So Jerusalem is here, and
Right.
then Joppa is here, and unnamed Caesarea is here. And this is probably Maritima, because I think it is. So Caesarea Philippi is up
Okay.
here.
Okay.
Nowhere near each other. They are just Caesarea in the Bible. Interesting that the priests, the Pharisees, and it seems like maybe Pilate goes along with it, but that they remember the words of Jesus about him being resurrected, but not his disciples. They're the
Yeah.
ones that are like, he's going to come back, or they're going to try to pull off some sort of magic trick or something.
Imagine it's they're talking to Pilate and saying, "Hey, these guys are going to come steal the body," and it just cuts to them and they're all hiding in various places.
But the sealing of the stone would have probably been with the official Roman seal, and then with a cord and some wax, like really sealing it in, and it would have detected tampering. They would have been able to really see like someone has messed with this wax. They're trying to take this bot, and they would have started investigating as stupidly as they possibly could. I just know it. But I think that's all of my Matthew notes. Let me make sure that I don't have like some aha that I forgot about in like Luke or something, because I just have not turned. Scourging, which I kind of mentioned, was always preceding a capital punishment, so the crucifixion. And then sometimes it was a punishment on its own. The prisoner was stripped, tied to a post, and beaten on the back using short leather whips studded with sharp pieces of bone or metal. There was no limit on how many blows that they could take out on the prisoner, which often meant that this was fatal. And it also did not have to stay on their back. If the person fell down, they did not have to pick them back up. They could really technically hit them anywhere they wanted to. And that comes first. And then he's led away and put in the cloak or the robe and the crown of thorns and given his staff, the reed. And they then proceed to mock him. And it's not really translated well in most English translations, but where they start striking him and spitting on him and kneeling and mocking him. It looks like it only happens maybe once in most English translations, and then they just immediately stop and take it away. That probably would have gone on for like an hour.
Mhm.
They were repeatedly doing it. The crown of thorns, the note says, with this crown, the soldiers unwittingly pictured God's curse on sinful humanity being thrust on Jesus. If you remember Genesis 3:17 through 18, the man's curse is thorns and thistles. And so this curse, which we've already talked about, was given by the Son because this was God on foot, which means it had to be the Son. And so then this is happening to Jesus, who is the Son of God. So then Jesus gave this curse that then later was used to crown him, which is representative of said curse that he's then taking on to then get rid of.
Mhm.
The cross, like I said, was the cross beam, or like the arm part, and it would have weighed about 100 pounds. The loud cry that Jesus utters, and then he breathes his last. It is worded in that way in verse 37 of Mark 15:37. And this is how we know he did not die a normal death. He did not just die from being crucified. He, on purpose, through his own will, surrendered his life at that point, because a normal man would not have been able to scream at that point.
Mhm.
They would have been so tired and so dehydrated and weak that they could not have just yelled. But
taking your breath will be incredibly painful.
But crucifixions usually took about 2 to 3 days to kill somebody. And this was over the span of like 3 hours. I mean, I think that's everything.